Hi, and welcome to Anchoring Wounded Christians Through Spiritual Storms. With your host, Heather O'Brien, I'm going to give you step-by-step details to help you defeat the enemy. Today, we're going to listen into a class discussion on what am I missing? How do we get the power flowing? When we have a tool in our hand, we know God gave it to us, but it's just not working. Okay, let's tune in.
Who's familiar with power tools? Who has a power tool?
I am a power tool.
My husband does, but I don't use them.
I don't know that I even know how to use this, but this is my husband's and he got it all ready for me to use and show. You know that this is a power screwdriver. Oh, I did something. I turned the light on. All right, so that's part of the lesson is that it does have a light and that's a guide.
Yeah.
So I don't know how I turned it on. So when you have a power tool, if you don't know how to use it, like I don't, it's not very effective. Would you agree?
Very much so.
So I could probably still use it like a screwdriver, but it won't be as effective or powerful. How do you turn it on?
I don't know. I've never seen one of these. I don't know where the trigger is.
This is working great for my lesson. I'll just keep, y'all get the point. I don't know how to use this. This is so great. God planned this. I don't know how to use this, but I have access to it, right? I remember when I first got married, Jason's out of town all the time, and I had bought like a bookshelf, and it's, one of those junky ones from Walmart or whatever, and it had 1,000 different little things to do. And I had what I had. He had all his tools with him. I didn't have any tools. After this experience, my parents bought me a toolbox, that was mine. But here's why it was such an experience. So I didn't have a screwdriver with a handle like this. I had a real thin one. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like there's real thin ones like this, and they're great for little bitty spots and just little bitty things. But I put a whole bookshelf together with this thing. I was determined. I was alone. I had the time and I wanted my bookshelf, and I was proud that I could do it. I had the capacity to do it, and I didn't necessarily have the right tools, but I had a tool. Okay, so stick with me. I don't know if you can imagine, but I didn't have a rubber grip to it, and I was twisting and twisting and twisting a lot. My hand got tore up. My hand was blistered, but I completed the project. I was determined, and I got what I wanted, right? I wanted a bookshelf. And after that, I even bought me a little power thing, and my parents bought me a little kit, and because they heard my story. But I was proud of myself. I was like, my hand hurts, but look what I did. And I had to redo it several times. You know how you put it backwards? It's like in the front. Now you can see the cardboardy stuff that was supposed to be in the back. I had to redo because I was learning. That was my first time building a project. Okay, that's what happened. So now I know if I want something hung, if I want something done, all I have to do is go find a hammer. And if my husband sees the hammer in my hand, what do you need?
What are you about to do?
Now I can get him to help me quick. All I have to do is put a tool in my hand. Okay. It works too. Okay, so the tools for the job might be in your hand, but what if they're lacking the power to get the job done? And I want you to think about your circumstances. So all of our circumstances are going to be a little bit different. So the things that I'm thinking of are not really specific. I'm going to give a very general lesson today, but you are going to input your thing. So you might want to think about relationships. It could be any kind of relationships, with your spouse, with your children, with your friends, with parents, whatever. But also your job, your finances, maybe even hobbies. So I want you to think about your situation that you're thinking, I wish this thing could work better. For me, I think about my business, I would like to see more flow in it. And this is how God gave me this lesson. He started by showing me a power tool, and of course I couldn't bring this as a prop, but he showed me a chainsaw of the powered kind. And if you could imagine, I don't know how to work them. I'm never even going to put one in my hand. But this was the vision God gave me, was the chainsaw and basically a big old, tree branch that's this thick. And you're just sitting there sawing back and forth. But I've got an electric chainsaw in my hand. Just like I had this, but I had no idea how to use it. So I would probably end up doing this to to screw things. Okay, so imagine that with a chainsaw. Same thing, right? And the Lord's like, you have tools with power, but you don't know how to use the power, so it's not working like it could. It has potential. So I want you to think about this place in your life that's not quite at the fullest capacity that it could be. You have practical skills. You have tools. Like, you have the tools. You have the know-how. You have the physical ability. You might even have the spiritual ability. You know some scriptures to pray. You know how to pray. You know how to declare, but you're not seeing the results. The power isn't there. So how do you get the power there? You know God called you to it, but it's not flowing as if God called you to it. It's like there's giants in the promised land. You don't know who they are, what their names are, how to fight them. You're just doing the thing you know to do. So your internal narrative might look a little bit negative when things aren't going well in your relationships, in your job, in the things that you're putting your hands to that's not flowing well. You might say, what's wrong with me? You might say, why can't I figure this out? You could say, I must not have heard God correctly. I'm probably not called to this. Probably just think I am. And then we might have the self-imposed guilt and say, I should have figured this out by now. You know, when we use the word should, that implies guilt. But the Lord is showing me, if you change that internal narrative, you're going to get the power to start flowing. And the internal narrative that needs to happen is, what am I missing? If you ask that question, you're not negating the fact that God called you to do it. You're not negating the fact that there's giants in the promised land. What you're saying is, what am I missing? And what you're missing could be some spiritual components, but it could be some, like in the natural, you could just need experience. You could need more knowledge. You might need, what do you call it when people, influential?
Influencers.
They might be the step that you need. Okay, so I'm thinking of a time when I first started teaching, and I knew I was called to teach. In fact, before I ever taught in front of anybody, I was a licensed minister. And I'm sure everyone thought I was all good to go, but I had never even done it in front of people. Had done one-on-one. I understood the Bible, you know, as much as I did at that time, right? And I was nervous. So I got in front of a crowd and I was nervous. My voice was stumbling, but there was effects beforehand. My stomach was messed up. I physically was shaken with the anxiety before and after. And while I was talking, my voice was fluttering. I was not sure of myself. However, I was sure of my calling, and God reaffirmed it. Y'all seen me show you the gadfly that Jason made with the little kid, and it was my Sunday school lesson. It was one of the first where I was still really nervous. And I come home, I knew I was supposed to teach about the plagues, and I came home and my husband was building a little puzzle, and it was a gadfly, and I had just learned that word that day, and it went with my lesson. And I was like, I do hear the Lord. I am called to teach this, and I knew I heard him, but I was still nervous. So I knew I was called. Do you get where I'm going with this? I knew that I was called, but I was still nervous. Did the nervous mean I wasn't called? I had heard someone preach this sermon before that he didn't like to fly, but he knew he was called to the nations, and he could either surrender to the fear, or he could just agree he's called, so God's gonna help him through the fear. He also had a home group, and every time before he was supposed to teach a little lesson, he would get so nervous he would, be in the bathroom for 30 minutes before, up until the time that he was supposed to teach, and it went for years. But the fact that I had heard that message helped prepare me that he was called. He knew he was called. The nervousness and the fear, it was just a giant in his promised land. So someone could have told him, well, and someone did tell me this. Someone very close and dear to me said, well, maybe you're not meant to do that. Because I had expressed to them how nervous I was. And instead of them calming my fears and reassuring me, they said, maybe that's not what you're meant to do. And I had a flash memory of all these sermons that I had heard where this other person had, faced their fears and just faced their fears and faced their fears. And I knew, nope, that's not it. I just didn't have the experience. I didn't have the literal experience of being in front of a crowd. That didn't mean I wasn't called to it. It meant I had to grow. So I'm trying to give you some examples of things that your internal narrative might go really negative, and then you're like submitting to this giant in the promised land. So spiritually, this is like in the natural, you might just have lack of experience, knowledge, or influence for the job. I'm trying to give you like my parallel, but you're gonna have to insert your parallel. But there's spiritual components too, right? In this spirit, that person that said maybe you're not called to it, do you think they might be influenced spiritually by something negative to tell me that so that I wouldn't do the thing that I know I'm supposed to do? So there's giants in our promised land. And those giants might come in the face of, like for me, okay, fear, anxiety, worry, physical things with fear. So all of this, the lack, your lack, not God's lack, your lack of experience, of know-how, of knowing how to even fight the spiritual components could lead you to these negative internal narratives that will hold you back. And so you might have the power tool in your hand, but there's no power to it. Sometimes the power needs to flow in different ways, but when you say, what am I missing? That changes your internal narrative to not focus on your lack of calling, your lack of abilities, your lack of anything, but what you're doing is you're praying, God, what am I missing? You're asking God, the Father, the creator of everything, the one who's leading you to that place. Okay, God, you led me this direction, but what am I missing? And what am I missing?
Hey there, warriors. I just want to stop this recording just to tell you really quick how I went from being an addict to being free from all addictions so that I could set the prisoners and the captives free, just like Jesus talks about in Isaiah 61. I've been addicted to so many things like nicotine, food, and television, and that might sound mediocre compared to other things, but the recipe that freed me is setting others free too. They've been freed of addictions to marijuana, stealing, alcohol, nicotine, nail biting, sexual perversions, and every form of strongholds over their identity. And I want to tell you about a free resource that I want to give you if you are suffering from any kind of addiction. This will help you. If you go to heatherobrien.net/courses, you can find a free resource on breaking free from addictions. It has a reading plan and a video plan. This is the recipe that has brought everyone freedom that I have ever needed to help with addictions. So if you're interested, go to heatherobrien.net/courses, and I bless you on your journey from wounded to warrior. I declare over you that you don't have to be addicted to anything except for King Jesus. He is the high above all highs, the way, the truth, and the life. He is the bread, he is the wine, he is the intoxication that you've been looking for, you've been dreaming of, and you've been trying to fill every void with. And I bless you to receive the Holy Spirit and the intoxication that comes from even right now. Okay, let's continue with our show.
Could be even faith, because we could be full of doubt. And that was my story. Whenever I was being called to homeschool my kids and stay home, not go back to work, we didn't have the money coming in. There was like no money. And maybe y'all have heard me say this before, but I stood in front of the kitchen sink and I said, God, we need $2,000 by Monday, or else I'll start looking for a job, because you must not have called me to this. You certainly didn't call me to start doing this to lead me and keep me in debt. That shouldn't be the thing. So you're either going to give me provision for the vision that I saw, or I just heard wrong. And what I did in that prayer is I changed my faith level of, okay, God, I'm pretty sure you said this, but you're going to confirm it or not. If you didn't say it, that's fine. And the money was in my account the next day. So he confirmed it. And he did that every single month. That's been 6 years. I never know where the money's going to come from. And he does that every single month. It's like kind of living in the wilderness and the manna that keeps falling. It's God. There's provision for the vision, but I had to surrender my credit card, my faith in the credit card. I was like, God, like I'm swiping it, but there's no way to pay it. And I still use it, but I swipe it now with faith to say, thank you, Jesus. Yeah. You're going to help me pay this bill. And when the bill comes, God, I know you're going to supply it. We are not going to be in debt because I'm at home doing the thing that you told me to do. Okay, so I had to raise my faith level because I was living in doubt. I was swiping my card and saying, well, I've got this much balance. It was kind of my plan B, is using the balance, the availability of the credit. All right, so power tools without the source of power aren't as handy. Greater power means greater accuracy and time saved. The power tools are usually more precise because they move quickly and have some guides. And that's why we were seeing the light on this. And I was thinking about there's certain levels, like you can project where studs are and stuff, right? Because it's got guides on it. It's like even a level is a guide where it has the little fluid bubble thing.
Yeah.
It's a guide that's going to help you stay straight. So it is kind of a power tool in the sense because it's got a guide on it. It's more than just you. So I'm giving you physical examples so that we can line it up in the spiritual in just a minute. More power means that jobs are going to get done far more quickly than they would with a manual tool. And the right tool for the right job might even mean you don't get hurt. Do you remember my hand was all blistered? If I had this tool, I doubt I would have been, my hand might have been sore because I did a lot of twisting, but it wouldn't have been the same.
It wouldn't have been all.
It wouldn't have been the same. And if I had this tool, now I will say this, because they go so fast, they usually go straight. But whenever I'm doing this and I'm doing it real hard, like have y'all ever seen it where it goes like, and you're like, oh no, like now the wood's cracked, and y'all know what I'm talking about. It's like
Absolutely.
that screw did not go straight, and now like I got a really big hole. I've done that because I was using my strength, my power, my guide, and I just messed up the whole thing. I'm like, we gotta turn this one around. Or get some glue, or we just call Jason. Jason, I messed it up. Okay, so that's what happens when we use manual tools. I'm setting you up. I hope that you're getting the picture. I'm trying to do a parallel with the natural. So what's in your hand? I've got several scriptures here I'm sure you're very familiar with. So I'll tell the story a little bit just to give you the ground. So I've got 4 different scriptures that came to my mind when God said, well, what's in your hand? Remember, we're thinking about the tools that are in our hand. What is in it? Is it an electric chainsaw that you're trying to use manually? Is it an electric screwdriver that you don't know how to turn on? Okay, so what's in your hand? How many times can y'all think about the time that God asked that in the scriptures? I found 4. There's probably way more. In Exodus 4, verses 2-5, the Lord asked him, this is Moses, what's in your hand? And he says, a shepherd's staff. So think with me, he had a shepherd's staff in his hand. And if you know the whole story, God says, we'll throw it down, and it became a snake. And it says that Moses actually ran. Like he got scared. Like his staff turned into a snake and he stood back. Like who wouldn't? And then the Lord said, pick it up by the tail, and he did. And it became a staff again. Okay, so this was something that was already in his hand. And just for context, the beginning of the story, Moses was like, how are they going to believe me? And then that's how God answered him. He said, throw what's in your hand, throw your thing down. And then at the end of that story, he says, they will know you by this sign. They'll believe you by this sign. So it was about belief in that context. But remember, God said, what's in your hand? So he was a shepherd, and he was going to use the thing that he already had to do the job. So I want you to think about your relationships. You already have some knowledge, some experience, some practical tools, some practical know-how to do the thing that God's calling you to do. Now, think outside the box. If he's calling you to write a book, if he's calling you to sing a song, if he's calling you to write a song, write a poem, love on your woman in a special way, fix a relationship, mend a relationship, whatever it is, I want you to impose your thing. Maybe he's trying to help you get out of grief. He's trying to help you get to a place of freedom from an addiction. Whatever it is, he's asking, the very first thing he's asking is, what's already in your hand? What do you already have? And so remember, you might have something with no power to it, but you might have something with power to it. You just need to figure out how to get the power going, okay? In Luke 9, verse 13-17, y'all are familiar with the story where the little boy had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And I went through, I think this was in 3 different gospels, and it alludes to the fact that we only have this. But it was what was in their hand. This is what we have. We have. Why do you think they would even brought that to attention? If it was not worthy of anything, I mean, it's a really peculiar thing when there's 5,000 people and they're like, well, we have 2 pieces of bread. I mean, you think that would make them feel so stupid that they wouldn't even bring that to the surface. Have y'all ever thought about that before? Like, what gave them the confidence
What
to even
Jesus gonna
say?
think when I say I got 2 pieces of bread?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how they did that.
It's curious.
Yeah.
But isn't it kind of like the woman with her 2 pennies and the guy with all the money?
Mm-hmm.
It's about, giving your everything.
Yep. And maybe that's what they were thinking when they brought it to him.
Yeah.
So they got what they had in their hand, and Jesus multiplied it, and there was more than enough. In fact, there was an abundance, and they all had baskets left over. Okay, let's keep going. In 1 Kings 17:12, this is about the widow. She was fixing to die. She was ready to die. She said, I swear by the Lord your God, I don't have a single piece of bread in the house, and I have only a handful of flour left in the jar and a little cooking oil in the bottom of the jug. I was just gathering a few sticks to cook the last meal so that my son and I could die. So this is Elisha. She's talking to Elisha because he was like, go make me something to eat. And she's like, I don't really have anything, but I do have this little bit. And he required of her to give that little bit. He required of her to make it for him first. And then there was an abundance. It would never dry up as long as there was a famine. And I want you to be thinking about this story. Like, how did the Spirit of God, how did the power flow through that little bit of flour and that little bit of oil? Where's the source of the power? You could just say Elisha, but he's not the source. It's always God. How did she tap into that source from him?
She had to have tapped in, but I don't know how at that time, because women didn't read the scroll. They didn't have the word in their hand.
There you go. So it wasn't because of a scripture she was quoting or anything.
She might have knew scripture, but it was because what she had heard somebody else read to her.
And what made her surrender the last meal to this prophet that
Knowing
she
that
just
her
met?
son that would be hard to give the meal away from your child, the last meal from
Well,
that
what
child.
about the child is the one who gave away the 5 fish and the loaves?
Yeah.
The child did. He just gave away his lunch.
That childlike faith.
Yes,
There you go.
childlike faith.
I think we're in 2 Kings 4:2. This is another one. What can I do to help you? Elisha asked. Tell me, what do you have in the house? And this is the one where the woman needed to pay off some debt. And so he multiplied. It says nothing at all except to have a flask of oil. Nothing but, well, I do have this. And he multiplied the oil so she could pay all her debts and all that. So how did the power start flowing with I have nothing but this. I have nothing but this. I have nothing but this. And I don't know where the button is to turn it on. It's kind of driving me crazy. We've got to figure this out to finish the lesson. Oh, how'd you do it? What'd you do? Oh, it works when you... Oh, that's the Lord.
That's good. That's
That's the
good.
Lord right there. Y'all feel the
I'm
wind
telling
on
you.
that?
Childproof.
So when you push it, when you need it, it works. Oh, that's the Lord right there.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
you need the power flows. So when you need it and you know that it's available, you know, I've got a power tool in my hand and I'm going to put this power to this thing right here and it's going to turn on. That's good right there. That was the Lord leading you to figure that out.
I use curiosity.
You had
Well,
what you
It was the Holy
needed.
Spirit.
I was gonna tell her to do
teach.
that at the end of the lesson. I bet you that's pressure activated, but I wasn't
Well,
gonna
look at
interrupt over
you.
it.
Ah,
so pressure, I love that. Pressure.
pressure.
activated.
Oh yeah. You was
So,
under
so
pressure
these
to
people
stand
were
up.
under pressure.
Yeah.
Look how good this is flowing. The Lord knew exactly what we need.
Absolutely.
Pressure activated. They were under pressure. The lady owed a whole bunch of debt. She was under pressure. So when the prophet of the Lord comes, I'll do whatever he says. I'm under pressure. He's got the source of the power that I need. They were under pressure when they needed to feed 5,000 people. And that pressure, maybe the little boy felt pressure to give what he had.
He saw the need, I guess.
So I want you to think about, what do you have in your hand and why is it not got the power to it? And I want you to keep asking yourself the question, what am I missing? What am I missing? Not that I'm not in the right place and not that I don't have the right tool. What am I missing? In other words, we needed the pressure applied to the situation to make this thing turn on. So when the pressure is applied, can you start the power source? Now, the Lord was showing me in my particular situation, it wasn't anything I was personally lacking. It was a spiritual battle that I was not aware of. If you're not aware of what you're fighting, how do you fight it? If you're not aware that you're fighting a giant, because we can't necessarily see in the spirit world until we open our spiritual eyes. But that's kind of the what am I missing? And I went to the Lord in prayer and I said, God, I'm pretty sure you called me to this thing. I'm pretty sure that I have gotten the knowledge and the know-how that I need, but it's not going forward past this point. What am I missing? And I immediately had a vision of a spiritual thing holding me back. And then he sent me to a sermon where it was like the very first person I looked at. He had a sermon that talked about the thing that I needed. But I had to ask the Lord in the right way, because I had been asking what's wrong with me. I had been like making the internal narrative and my prayers negative instead of asking the right question. And I've told you about this before. Maybe we talked about it last week. But if we're not praying the right prayers, you're not going to get the right answers. So sometimes you're asking God to lift this burden, take this desire away from me, or do this or that, but that's not what he's looking for. He's looking for us to change our prayers. And so if you change your prayer to what am I missing? What do I not see? Help me not to be deceived. Maybe you can see it that way. Help me not to be deceived. I was deceived to think that the power wasn't flowing because of me, but the power wasn't flowing because there was a spiritual giant in my path that I was not fighting. I wasn't even aware to fight. That's just my personal. I don't think that's always the situation. I think sometimes it's what am I missing? And I told you about there's times where I needed to exchange my doubt for faith. And sometimes there's plenty of times where God's like, you aren't ready yet. You need to study. You need to prepare. This lesson is not ready for you.
Okay, warrior, for today's actionable step, I want to lead you through a prayer. And you can pray with me right now, right where you are. Pray in your mind if you need to, or pray out loud if you can. But what we're going to do is pray, God, would you please show me what I'm missing? What is the thing that is missing in this area of my life that I am looking for breakthrough? I'm looking for the power source behind the tool that you've given me. In Jesus' name, I thank you for showing me. Okay, so I want you to pray that. I want you to take time to close your eyes, be silent with the Lord, and really listen. I think you might be surprised as to what you receive from the Lord in this prayer. That's your actionable step for today. And I bet this lesson really ministered to you and you were thinking of at least one person while you were listening to it. If that's true, would you please pause the program right now, text this episode to that person you were thinking of, and I just pray that blessings and favor will chase you down.